So box.
Hi, my name is Rochelle and you're watching or listening to Box F1 Pod. Welcome to the Monaco Grand Prix episode. This is a very emotional episode because we finally got to see Charles Leclerc cross the finish line as a winner. It was super emotional, but also kind of a roller coaster, but also like there were long parts of each emotion that we felt. So like first there was lap 1, which was filled with so much drama. And then there was literally nothing for the rest of the race. And then Charles won and that was super emotional. And so it was just sort of like drama, boring, floods of tears. Happy tears. And I can't wait to get into it. But what I will be preparing today is to commemorate Charles's win. I'll be making his favorite food, which is according to him, a margherita pizza with prosciutto. He also likes caprese and tiramisu. I don't eat tiramisu, so I will not be making tiramisu. I will be making the margherita pizza without the prosciutto because I don't eat prosciutto. I wish I did, but I don't. And I will be making a take on the margherita pizza because I did not have the San Marzano tomatoes that you're supposed to have. I only have fresh tomatoes. And look how pretty they are. I can't just not use them. So this is what I will be cooking with today. Apologies to all the pizza purists out there. This will be a variation on the margherita pizza. In the back though, because I'll not be using a tomato sauce, I am infusing garlic and basil into olive oil and I'll be using that as my base and as like a drizzle. So that's prepping in the back. In the meantime, I'll start chopping up my tomatoes, chopping up my mozzarella, and we will get into the Monaco Grand Prix. But before we can discuss Charles and just this entire weekend, it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1, off-duty F1. So the very first thing we need to discuss, I did watch these in advance, in case anyone was wondering. The first thing we need to discuss is the Piastri Leclerc joining of families, very Game of Thrones, that occurred over on Twitter. X, whatever. So the first thing we need to discuss is the original tweet, which I did mention briefly last week. And it was basically, if you've been following Oscar on Twitter, he's been saying that he's been sort of trying to find bits of his heritage for each Grand Prix so that he could claim it's his home Grand Prix. He said his grandfather was like 3/16 Chinese, so he's like, this is my home Grand Prix. But then he did the same thing for Imola. And now he tried to do the same for Monaco as a joke. So Oscar tweeted, searching my family tree trying to find any Monegasque roots, to which Charles replied, I can adopt you if needed. To which Oscar replied, call me Oscar Jack Piastri Leclerc, hyphenating it, and said, can't wait to meet my brother Leo on Thursday if he can pop by McLaren. To which Nicole Piastri, Oscar's mother, replied, I have some questions. Then rolls around Monaco and everyone is now in on this joke. Literally everyone, including F1. The official graphic on the television was changed to Oscar Piastri Leclerc. And during FP1, Oscar was like in the top 3 and Charles was not. And so Charles replied to the tweet said mixed feelings for the Leclerc family. And then F1 kept the changed graphic all through qualifying and it was very funny. What was also funny was when the graphic went live, Nicole Piastri reshared it on her own Twitter and said, in need of a new son, and tagged at Yuki Tsunoda and was like, you game? To which Yuki never replied. But also in the post-qualifying press conference, Carlos was getting like really jealous. He's like, can your mom cut my hair? Can your mom do this? And Charles was like, don't be jealous, Carlos. It was very funny. And then also the like joke extended to Arthur Leclerc, Charles's brother. He was being interviewed and he's like, oh, I'm so happy for my nephew. It just like keeps going after the race. Nicole Piastri tweeted, so happy for my sons, and tagged Oscar and Yuki, to which like, I don't think Yuki even saw this as happening. I have no idea if he's aware, but I just find it so funny. And also 10 out of 10 choice from Nicole Piastri. Of all the people to adopt on the grid, Yuki is definitely the best option. So I fully support that. Anyway, this joke is like, I don't know if it'll ever get old. Currently not getting old for me. And I just hope it keeps on going. Also, after Oscar won, his caption for his post was, what a big week, a podium and an adoption. Just everyone's in on it and it's great. All right. Other stuff that happened online. Tommy Hilfiger obviously sponsors Mercedes. And so George posted a picture of him wearing Tommy Hilfiger. It's like a very dramatic post of him like with the wind in his hair and his clothes. And someone commented on the post, who made this shirt? And another person replied, someone with zero fashion sense or taste, looks like a tablecloth. And Tommy Hilfiger replied on the thread and said, hi, it's us, the people with zero fashion sense, apparently. I love when they just let social media admins go ham. Speaking of ham, I wonder if Tommy Hilfiger is going to move over to Ferrari with Lewis or if they're going to stay at McLaren and Mercedes, because like Mercedes seems to be really losing sponsors because Monsters went over to McLaren and I thought they were like Lewis till they die. So that was interesting. So we'll see where Tommy goes. Also, this is not exactly off duty, but last week after the Grand Prix, Fred Vasseur was asked if he thinks Mercedes are making progress. And his response was, the Mercedes? They were 28 seconds behind Charles at the end of the race. So yes, I think they're getting a little bit closer, which like, Fred is literally just an icon. Everything he says is just gold. Everything he does, everything he says, and he's just like a little devil. Anyway, speaking of French, both of our French boys over at Alpine made their way over to Cannes at separate events. God forbid they go to the same one, with their girlfriends. Esti Bestie went with his girlfriend Flavie, who is stunning. And also, by the way, this weekend in the Monaco Grand Prix, she rocked up to the paddock with her textbooks and a laptop as her accessories. And I just love it. It's just giving Legally Blonde in real time in like the best way possible. She's studying medicine. She's hot. Don't know what she's doing with Esteban. But there we have it. Okay, everything's chopped. I'm just gonna wait for the oven to preheat and for the oil to finish, and then we'll get started. All right, moving on. Pierre and his girlfriend Kika also went to a con event, and they both looked stunning. Pierre was wearing a bit more fashionable pants. They were more like the loose fitted ones. He looked very cool. Anyway. The next thing I want to talk about is not off the grid yet, but it will be. During the race, George made a strategy request before saying, we're just poodling around at the moment. Poodling is basically a very British word to mean to drive around, like all chill and casual, like a relaxed drive, basically. And even though he's still going 100 miles an hour, I guess it felt like poodling to him. But in the media pen, he was asked about it, and they were like, this is like a Russellism. No one says that. And he literally visibly like blanched and was like, shit, this is going to be a thing now, isn't it? It's going to follow me around on the internet. I shouldn't have said that. And I just love that he knows how memeable he is, because he is. He's such a meme. He's just so memorable. He cannot help it. All right. Moving on, lap 2, trackside in Monaco. So during the press conference on media day, all the guys were asked their favorite movie, and they all gave such on-brand answers. It was actually funny. Esteban's favorite movie is The Dark Knight Rises. Yuki loves The Transporter because he loves Jason Statham. George loves Casino Royale. He grew up watching James Bond. Max loves Wolf of Wall Street or The Hangover. Alex likes the Grand Budapest Hotel. And Charles said The Hangover is a cool one, but Harry Potter has always been his favorite. When he was 10, he could like quote all the lines. And Max was like, did you know how to do the, and like waves his hand back and forth like he's holding a wand, which is, I assume he meant like, do you know how to do the spells? And Charles was like, yeah, I can do that. I can do this. And then Charles said everyone used to tell him he looked like Harry Potter. And Alex was like, I was just thinking with glasses and your hair at that time, you totally could. And then George waltzes in and is like, the very first video I have saved on my phone from 2012 is Charles like behaving like a wizard. And Charles is like, you keep that video to yourself. And Max was like, I would like to see that video. And I think his name was Tom Clarkson, was like, you post that video, George Russell. George Russell has yet to post a video, but people did zoom in, and George described the video as Charles having a broomstick between his legs, pretending to fly around the track. Sounds 10 out of 10. I pray that he releases that video. So there was this random video of like Fred and Toto doing some sort of junket, I guess. But in the still of this video, it looked like Fred was like grinding up against Toto, and it looked like Toto was kissing Fred's head. It was very bizarre. And Ted, with the notebook or whatever from Sky, was like standing there like looking really confused at them. But my favorite was someone responded to the tweet of this video and wrote, Fred is such a whore, he seduces him and then leaves him with no engineers. I giggled because it's true. Fred really did play Toto for literally his entire staff, including Lewis Hamilton. I don't know how Toto doesn't hate him, because Toto loves a grudge. This seems a very grudgeable offense. Also, a couple of shout outs. Daughters on the grid. Kevin's daughter and him were walking. She was on a scooter and walking along with Kevin Magnuson, and she sees a fan holding out a notebook for Kevin to sign, and he walked past it. So she scooters over to her dad and starts pulling on his shirt and making him go back, and he went back and signed the person's notebook, and it was literally the cutest thing ever. And watching girl dad Kevin and trying to process that it is the same man who is 2 penalty points away from a race ban is truly difficult, because it was just so, it was so cute. I think the kid's like 3 or 4. She's so cute in her little pink with a little bleach blonde hair, because they're Danish, and she just stares at this woman with her notebook and like drags her father over. It was very cute, and Kevin comes just like trundling over, like grinning, like, oh man, yeah, sorry. And she, like, as he walks, he signs it, smiles, walks away, and the girl is looking up at the person like, did you get what you need? Was that all you needed? Was that good? And then like just scooters away. It was so cute. And whoa. In more father-daughter news, there was a video going around of P on Max's lap playing The Sim. And he was doing the pedals and like holding her, and she was doing the arm stuff. What's it called? The wheel. She was driving. I don't know. But it looked really cute. And everyone's like, Max is never getting his sim back when they get home, because she's like obsessed. All right, moving on. Lap 3, celebrities. While I talk about celebrities, I'm going to start with the dough. I did not make my own dough. I did not make my own dough because I didn't realize it had to rise. So I bought some at my favorite store. Everything they have is like 10 out of 10. So I don't doubt this is going to be excellent dough, but I did want to say I did not make it myself. So moving on to celebrities, I want to dedicate a separate moment to all the celebrities that we encountered on the grid walk, because that was like an entire experience on its own. But some of the celebrities that were present that did not have the pleasure to be accosted by Brundle included John Legend, Becky G, Matt Damon, Jared Leto, Heidi Klum, Emily Ratajkowski, Trent Arnold, who's a football player for any of my American listeners, Dacre Montgomery from Stranger Things, the hot guy Billy, for anyone who doesn't know his name, and Odell Beckham Jr., who's an NFL player for any of my non-American listeners. Also not part of the grid walk, but or part of this list of celebs, but Nicholas Galitzine was there, who is of red, white, and royal blue fame, as well as that new Harry Styles like fan fiction movie that he was in with Anne Hathaway called The Idea of You. So he was there, and he was the guy who like gives out the Pirelli tire for the pole position in qualifying. So he met Charles. And first of all, just seeing that video of them together was iconic, and I'm sure sent fandoms into absolute spiral. But also there was a video that started going around of them like signing the tire and taking a picture together, that you can see Nicholas telling Charles that he was like, I just did a movie with Anne Hathaway, and she wanted me to tell you that she's a huge fan. She loves you. And Charles looked like he had just like passed away. He was like, what? Me? Anyway, so moving on, the actual grid walk. So we had Mbappe. Okay, sorry, this is gonna be really random, but Mbappe reminds me of M'Baku from Black Panther, the name, because of the Mb. And every time I read Mbappe, I remember that one press junket interview for Avengers or whatever. And it was Winston Duke, who plays M'Baku, and Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie. And they were reading out like tweets or whatever. And one of the tweets was Sebastian Stan read it out, and it was, M'Baku can blow my back out if he wants to, and it kills me. And every time I read Mbappe's name, that's like all that goes through my head. But anyway, so Mbappe's walking the grid, and he has literally zero interest in speaking to Brundle, like absolutely none. But Brundle is committed to getting a conversation in with just any footballer, really. He sees a footballer, he wants to talk to him. Mbappe's security guard knows that Mbappe does not want to talk to Brundle. And so he's like kind of blocking him. Like not in a rude way. He's not like that big of a man, but. And so Brundle says naturally, the one thing that will get him in front of Mbappe is, I'm in charge around here. And you know, that didn't work. So he just tried to shovel his way in between security guards. He did get over to Mbappe. It wasn't a particularly great conversation. They didn't get very far because Mbappe wants absolutely nothing to do with Ted Brundle. But it was funny. And we saw him at the very end run over to Charles before the race started to wish him good luck. And he was the one who waved the checkered flag when Charles crossed, and he looked pretty fucking thrilled. So I thought that was cute. Do you even roll pizza dough out, or do you just pull it? All right, the other person on the grid that I loved was Michael Douglas. And Brenda went up to him and was like, oh, so I know you're a big F1 fan. And Michael Douglas's immediate reaction is, Catherine's not here today. She's filming Wednesday. She's doing great. And Brundle's like, oh, okay. And Michael Douglas was like, oh, sorry. I'm just like used to everyone talking to me to ask about her. So I just prefaced with, she's not here, I'm here alone. Brenda was like, well, no, I kind of wanted to talk to you too, sir. Michael Douglas, Academy Award winner, actor, and just like famous all on his own. But I thought that was really funny. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm doing great. We love you a lot. And Brenda was like, great, I hope she loves seeing us on TV together, and then just like walked away. But side note, excited that Wednesday is being filmed right now. Apparently they're moving away from it being romantic and they're making it more horror. And I personally thought there was enough horror last time. Also on the grid was Joe Jonas, which I found hilarious because Martin Brundle marches right up to him and in Joe Jonas's face goes, this is a Jonas brother. And I could lie and tell you which one it is, but I'll be honest, I have no clue. And Joe's like, hi, I'm Joe. And then Martin was like, oh, so do you like F1? Is this your first race? And Joe has the energy of one of those new fans. Like, I was guilty of this also. He's like, no, I'm actually a really big fan of F1. I'm here with Pierre Gasly. And I've been to many Grand Prix. I've been to Montreal, Miami, Monaco, blah, blah, blah. Starts listening them all off. And Brenda was like, oh, so you are a fan. And I thought it was really funny. And also when he said Pierre, I was like, Pierre who? And then Joe like really wanted to like show like, I'm a fan. And then just started like whipping out all this jargon describing qualifying and what he expects to see today. And I just found it very amusing. I'm not judging Joe at all. I'm judging Joe for other aspects of his life. Cough, cough, Sophie Turner. But I'm not judging him for how he's a fan of F1 because I think any fan of F1 is a fan of F1. Also, Alexandra Daddario was there of White Collar fame and of White Lotus fame. Wow, lots of whites. I just put that together. And Martin was like, you are in White Lotus. Like 3 years ago, but yes, she was in White Lotus. And he's like, and what are you up to these days? And she's like, I'm in Mayfair Witches. And Martin's like, that sounds terrifying. And then he was like, and what are you doing to pass the time? And she was like, in the meantime, I'd like to go to as many Grand Prix as possible. And Martin was like, where, like which ones? And she was like, oh, right. Yeah, I want to go to Japan or Singapore. And Martin was like, Singapore seems like a good option because I feel like she forgot that Japan happened. And then she also said, whichever one I'm invited to, which is so real because she clearly really likes F1. F1's expensive, even if you have White Lotus money. Anya Taylor-Joy was there, which is probably the biggest name so far that we've listed. She happily spoke to Martin on the grid walk. She said this is her first real life race, but she grew up watching with her parents. And so she's super excited to be here. So I thought that was very cute. And she's here with Lewis because she said she's here to see some good racing and to support a very, very good friend and goat. I don't think she said the word goat, but goat. I walked by Diplo like 10 times going like, is there anyone famous here? Anyone? I swear that was Diplo on the grid that he just like completely bypassed several times. He talked to Jack Doohan's dad, the reserve driver for Alpine, who I absolutely loved. He had like the most like, what to me sounded like the Cockney version of the Australian accent. And he was like, I don't know what all this is about, but love it. And he just seems like the least like dance mom dad. He was like, I'm just here for a good time. Jack's doing great, really proud of him. And then there was also Virgil van Dijk, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's a Dutch footballer who plays for Liverpool, and everyone wanted a piece of him. Like he was a hot commodity. Everyone wanted to talk to him, particularly Brundle, who was very determined to get like 35 seconds with Virgil to the point where he queued up. He was like, I'll wait, no worries, and like literally waited to speak to him, which I don't think I've ever seen Brundle do. He really likes football is what I'm gathering from this. But I think Virgil was there to support Max, which I love. Dutch. Anyway, that's it for the celebrities. I'm sure there were so many more that I've definitely missed, but it's always a star-studded affair at Monaco Grand Prix. And Brundle's grid walk never ceases to amaze me. Maybe next year he'll know the Jonas Brothers. That's the least of his concerns. Next year, I'd like him to be able to identify Patrick Mahomes without being shouted into his ear that this random man that he's trying to accost on the grid walk is not Patrick Mahomes. Anyway, with that, we conclude the digital warm-up. On to the race rhyme. This is a story all about how the curse of the Monegasque Prince was broken somehow. Our tale begins on the shores of the Monaco harbor as locals, celebs, and millionaires lined up to watch the brother of Arthur. The Prince of Monaco, otherwise known as Charles Leclerc, pulled up on the track with his trusty sidekicks, Leo and Pierre. Rumors of a curse have followed Charles through these streets, but this year he turned up, refusing to concede. His performance in quali was second to none as he stormed his way to pole, followed closely by his adopted son. Saturday evening, Charles threw caution to the wind and ate a pizza, because nothing says fuck this witchy curse like a nice margarita. And then it was Sunday and it was lights out and away we go. Charles took off like he was a hoe on the go. But before Sector 1 could even be complete, 3 incidents shook the Monaco streets. Carlos and Oscar bump, giving the Ferrari a hole in its tire. Will Carlos survive, or will he be forced to retire? Elsewhere in lap 1, Esti Besti was like, au revoir, motherfucker, and started une guerre, leading to 1 DNF, a 5 places grid penalty, and a very angry Bruno and Pierre. But the biggest crash of all happened like a scene right out of a movie from Cannes, when 2 Hosses collided into Checo, turning his car into a squished Red Bull Con. This little incident caused a red flag and brought the entire race to a stop and changed the entire course of how this race would handle pit stops. Because once the race restarted, in original order, by the way, every pit wall was like, you must drive as slow as possible, okay? This is hard to do, and that's a fact that I'm not ignoring. But in the words of Max Verstappen, this race was fucking boring. That is until the very end, when suddenly the impossible seemed plausible, and it became undeniable that a Charles win was unstoppable. With tears in his eyes and the eyes of everyone from here to Rome, he told Brian on the radio that he's just gonna bring it home. The entire country of Monaco erupted in cheers as Prince Albert forgot protocol and couldn't hold back his tears. Because while Charles may have always been a prince in the sheets, today, finally, he is the prince of these Monegasque streets. The curse has been broken, so Monegasque witch, you can shove it. Charles Leclerc is here to slay, there's no doubt about it. Okay, on to analysis. Starting with quali, both Hosses had illegal rear wings, apparently, and were disqualified from quali and will start the race from the back of the grid. Really setting foreshadowing what's to come. Checo was out in Q1, which was wild. And also in Q3, Max hit the wall. So he was like still going, but ended up bailing because his car was just not doing great. And that's how he ended up in P6. He just made a mistake. Or he said he didn't make a mistake. He said it just happened. I don't really know what happened. Max ended up in P6 because he touched the wall. There was a very funny radio where Lando was like, fucking idiots, these blokes, all of them. Not all of them, just some of them. And his engineer goes, I won't ask you to name which ones are and aren't. That's nice. Carlos also in the post-quality conference said that straight up his only job is to help Charles bring home the win, which I love. He just like, he's not even like putting any pretenses about it. He's just like, the only goal this weekend is like, Charles has driven well enough to deserve this win, and it is my job as his teammate to make that happen. And I just love that. Also, when Charles got pole, the yacht horns just started going fucking crazy. And I really want to know, are people on the yachts also watching on the TV? Or are they only like trying to crane their necks to see the track? Like, how are they watching? How do they know to honk their horns? That's my question. Like, I really want to go to a live race, but I'm so like attached to the commentary and to the replays and to being able to rewatch everything in slow motion and to hear the analysis that like, I don't know how I'd watch live because I can't even see the whole track. Like, I don't know what would happen. Like, it sounds stressful. Anyway, the starting grid for Sunday is as follows. Charles, Oscar, Carlos, Lando, George, Max, Lewis, Yuki, Alex, Pierre, Esteban, Daniel, Lance, Fernando, Logan, Checo, Valtteri, Guan Yu, and Nico and Kevin, who are starting from the back because of their illegal wings. So on to the race. In my mind, this race can be split up into 3 parts. Part 1, lap 1, and all the incidents on the red flag. Part 2, the rest of the race. Just all of it, just the entire rest of the race. Part 3, Charles Leclerc. So that's exactly how we're gonna go about this, starting with part 1. So anything worth discussing this race happened at the beginning, in the very first lap, before the first sector. There were 3 incidents that were all like insane, like so insane that it almost made up for the fact that literally nothing else happened for the rest of the race. But we're gonna go through them step by step. So the first incident I wanna discuss is Carlos and Oscar. Carlos, out of everyone today, probably had the luckiest day humanly possible. Basically, Carlos nipped Oscar in like the first turn of lap 1. Carlos said he had understood that he tapped Oscar, but described it as the slightest of contacts in terms like he barely even felt it. But it caused a puncture in his tire and he ended up like going off track and everyone thought he was done. There were so many points in this race that we thought that Carlos was a goner. Actually, no, sorry. There was so many points within the first lap when we thought Carlos was a goner. First was when he drove off track. We're like, oh, puncture, he won't be able to move. But he ended up being able to slowly move his car forward into the pit lane where his tire could be changed. Then the red flag hit and we weren't sure if there was more damage and we weren't sure they would be able to fix it in time, but it was a puncture. So I don't know why that was something we weren't sure about. And also, another thing is we weren't sure where he would start. The starting grid was a bit of a mystery because we weren't sure if the full grid had passed the first sector, because the entire grid has to pass the first sector in order for the stews to be like, okay, we have a new order that we can reference. But if not everyone has passed, then we reference the starting order of the race. And so we're like, will he be able to start? Won't he be able to start? Will he be starting in third? Will he be starting on the back of the grid? Like, where is he starting? But luck was on his side and Charles' side, because I do think Carlos was pretty integral to Charles' win. We don't know what would have happened if he wasn't holding up George and if he wasn't like managing Lando and if he wasn't like close enough to Oscar without like there's like so many things he was supposed to be responsible for, and he did 10 out of 10. And I will talk about it in a second, but basically the starting grid was the same as the race starting grid. So when we restarted the race, it relined up with the original starting grid minus the people who DNF'd, which brings me to Alpine. Okay. I don't think I even realized something was happening with Alpine until like towards the end of the red flag when they mentioned that Esteban's car was being frantically worked on, because they didn't really show us what was happening, or it wasn't, maybe it went to pee. I don't know. But basically what happened is that Esteban attempted to overtake Pierre in Portier, which is a very tight corner that you just don't generally overtake people in. and there wasn't enough room. So he ended up going like on top of Pierre's car and like bouncing all the way up and flopping down, which when I first saw it, I'm like, well, that was Pierre's fault because like Esteban flew in the air, but Esteban just forced himself on top of Pierre's car. Like, the commentators were like, maybe if they had better grid position, maybe if this was further along in the race, maybe if it wasn't their teammates, we could find an excuse for this move. But this move can't be excused on a track like Monaco on your teammate in lap 1. Like, there's no really excuse for it. And we were still being told that his car was being worked on, but then we saw a clip of Esteban in his jeans during the red flag, so he was out of the race. Basically, everyone is furious with Esteban. Esteban takes responsibility for it. He apologizes to the team. He doesn't apologize to Pierre. He apologizes to the team and hopes that the team can score a point today still. But everyone is furious. Bruno is fucking angry, and he went to the media. He refused to do any interviews except bar one, where he said that Esteban's attack was completely out of line and exactly what we didn't want to see. There will be consequences and we will be making tough decisions. What? Like, I understand you're annoyed, but you can't say that to the media. You're the team principal. You have to say some bullshit like, yes, this seems like kind of a mistake, but we're going to talk about it as a team and it'll all be fine. Like, you can't threaten your driver. You can't. Not in public. The only good thing that come from this was that there's a bunch of memes of Oscar's face with the LinkedIn graphic, #open to work. There are also rumors, I thought that was a joke, but apparently there are serious rumors that Bruno and the Alpine team is considering suspending Esteban from the Canadian Grand Prix, which is insanity. Like, that is a complete overreaction to what happened. Yes, he did wrong. Yes, he shouldn't have made that move, but for such a drastic, they sound like he killed Pierre. He didn't do that. Like, it was wrong, it was bad, but it was very standard Esteban. And what it was actually was the fact that they hired these two kids when they hate each other. Why? They like brought this civil war upon themselves. Like, they are to blame. I know they got rid of Otmar, but like now the whole team's to blame. They cannot manage this relationship. They can say all they want, that they are friends and everything's fine. Nothing's fine. The FIA was equally annoyed, but we all know the FIA is just like persistently annoyed with Esteban. Like, nothing he does will not annoy him. But they gave him a 10-second penalty almost immediately after this happened, which everyone was very confused about because he wasn't racing. And then they later in the race converted that 10-second penalty into a 5-grid place penalty. So he will start the Canadian Grand Prix 5 places behind wherever he qualifies. Usually 10 converts to 3, but they really don't like Esteban. And I'm not like saying that Esteban shouldn't be penalized. I think he behaved poorly, but to be threatened with being fired or consequences, whatever the fuck that means, like Bruno's in the freaking French mafia and is gonna take Esteban out, and to like have a 5-grade place penalty and 2 penalty points seems a bit insane for this. Like, Pierre's fine, you know, like, I'm not condoning it, but like also this seems like a gross overreaction. Anyway, moving on to the biggest incident of the whole thing, the thing that caused the red flag, the thing that made all of us get to this point, is Haas and Checo. So honestly, for the longest time, I thought it was Carlos and Oscar's thing that caused the red flag, which was very confusing to me because I'm like, it was a puncture. But eventually they did show us what happened with Haas and Checo. I don't know if it was to like make sure that Checo was okay before they put this on national television, so it was probably good, but it was very confusing for a bit. So the first thing I saw was Checo's car, which looked like a crushed Red Bull can. It was just the cockpit. There was nothing else left of his car. It was like actually wild, but Checo was sitting right next to the car, like completely unscathed other than like emotional damage. Like, he looked furious. He was so mad that like when the medical car came to take them all back to the paddock, he just refused to get in with the Haas guys. He like waved them off in the car, slammed the door shut and walked off. Basically what happened, I think Kevin had overtaken Nico and was really trying to defend his place and wanted to stay ahead of Nico. And ahead of him was Checo. So he was it looked like he was trying to overtake Checo, but I think what his ultimate goal, and at least this is what the commentators were saying, was that his ultimate goal was to stay ahead of Nico. That was more important to him than being ahead of Checo. But he ended up being somewhere he should not have been at all. That place, Monaco in general, is very windy, and the part that he was in was particularly windy, and he was positioning himself as if he was like on a massive straight. And he had all this time to try to be side by side with Checo, and he just did not have the room or the time or the space. Like, he didn't have any of that. So the way he was behaving was just insane. And there is an argument that could be made that Checo should have given him more room. Not that Checo had much more room to give, because it's a very narrow, windy road. But there was perhaps an inch or two that he could have granted to Kevin. Kevin shouldn't have been there in the first place. Like, some people were saying Checo checked his mirrors, so he knew Kevin was there, but I don't think he was expecting Kevin to lunge into the like smidge of a gap that was there, and he like forced Checo into the wall, and then Nico was right behind him. Like, the bird's eye shot of them is like Checo being surrounded by the two Haas's, even though I think Nico's a little behind Kevin, but it looks like they're just like advancing on him. By the way, there's a really funny meme going around of Kevin sitting in the garage with his daughter, and they keep putting quotes like, "And that's how Daddy got suspended. And now Daddy's 2 points away from a suspension. And that's how Daddy fucked up the whole grid." It's kind of funny, but it's also not funny because Kevin caused this. Like, could Checo have done something else? Sure. But I don't think that would have ultimately changed the course of this because of what Kevin was doing with his car. And the craziest part of this entire situation is that almost immediately into the red flag, it said no further investigation due to the turn 1 incident. And everyone just assumed they met Carlos and Oscar because that truly needed no more investigation. And then further, once we restarted the race, they released a statement saying no further investigation to the Oscar Sainz incident. And everyone was like, wait, so what was the first statement? And we realized that they had almost instantly said that they were not going to be investigating this incident where Kevin killed 3 cars in one go. It was insane. He turned Checo's car into a Red Bull can. Squashed like that with no wheels. It was insanity. And he has only 2 penalty points away from a suspension from a race. And from what I'm understanding is that FIA has no intention of ever suspending anyone from a race. Which, if that's the case, what the fuck is the point of the penalty points? I'm not condoning people to be suspended unless they deserve it, but why are you threatening with it if you're but actually you're never going to get in trouble? Of course, Kevin's going to do these wild ass moves if he thinks he's never going to be suspended. He's just going to float through the rest of the year, 2 penalty points away from a suspension, consistently causing. There hasn't been a race in 2 months without Kevin behaving absurdly on track and just so now we're just gonna wait the whole year and then be oops, time ran out. You almost killed half the track, but it's fine. You menace you. It's so weird. And the fact that Esteban was so strictly reprimanded, he got such an aggressive calling out. And what's worse is his team's not even gonna fight the FIA on it because they're so angry at him for doing it to his teammate, when in reality, the fact that he was penalized to this state and Kevin did this, Pierre finished the race and got a point. Kevin destroyed the chance of any points for 3 cars. So the fact that he wasn't penalized and Esteban is bizarre. Anyway, so with half of the Red Bull scattered around the track, obviously this called out a red flag because they had to clean it up. And it's so narrow, there's no shot of doing it under any sort of safety car. But what the red flag caused was that everyone got to pit within the first lap. So they got their pit stop out of the way, which meant that there were going to be no pit stops for the rest of the race, which immediately took any interest out of this entire race. The best part about Monaco Grand Prix, the only thing to make it interesting or exciting are the strategies and the tire strategies and like the pit stop strategies and all of that stuff is the only thing that makes Monaco interesting because it's so hard to overtake. And the fact that we were robbed of all of that because of this red flag instantly set us up for the most boring race in history. So at the restart, I already talked about this, but there was a huge question mark about the order of the restart, which was primarily going to impact Carlos. But as we found out, it was the exact same as the regular start minus the 4 people who DNF'd. So the top 10 at least weren't impacted at all. So the rest of the race, part 2, the name of the game was going slow as fuck. Oscar said at one point that he thinks that they were all going slower than F2 because basically all the teams knew that no one was going to pit. So all they could do was to manage. They could manage the tires and make it through till the end, which meant everyone had to go slowly. And I'm not saying this critique does not negate the difficulty of doing this. Being able to manage the tires while maintaining your grid position is insanely difficult. Carlos, for example, had to be a certain amount close to Oscar without letting like Lando and George through. And so he had to be managing all these things at the same time. And that's super difficult. The top few were pretty tired. Like Charles looked kind of tired, even though he said he could keep going. Oscar looked kind of tired, but like there was a lot of mental work that they had to do. But also driving slowly when your entire job is to drive fast is hard. Like, it was so wild that at one point George said the poodling thing. Like, I'm just poodling around the track. And his engineer goes, we gain nothing by going faster, which is never what you want to hear out of the mouth of an F1 engineer. Like, it's just not what you want to hear. In the last few laps, they've all finally got a chance to go a bit faster. And literally, Yuki's radio was like, woohoo, finally! And it was kind of funny. So there was a bit more speed in the last 10 laps, but not like to the point where we were getting anything exciting happening. The funniest part of this entire race was Max's reaction to everything. And I'm not sure if I was picking up exactly what Max was putting down, but I think he was bored. That's just like what I think was going on. And I came to this conclusion based on the multiple radio messages to GP saying that this race was super boring. And then the post-race interviews where he mentioned the word boring every time. If we had a drinking game for every time Max said this race was boring, we'd be drunk at the end of this race. But my funniest quote from him, I think, was like, also he wasn't mad. Like, especially in the post-race interviews, he wasn't actually mad at this race being boring. He was just like, kind of like in shock. Like, this was really fucking boring. But one of my favorite interviews from him was when he said they were asking him about the one radio message to GP where he said, fuck me, this is boring. I should have brought my pillow. And she asked him, she's like, so you mentioned during the race that it was boring. And he like immediately interrupts her in deadpans. So how was it for you? Because it was boring. She's like, what? Well, Charles won. And he was like, well, yeah, but the race was boring. Like, how was that relevant to the race being boring? And then there was a really funny moment in the media pen where him and George were bantering. He like saw George next to him and he was like, me and George are gonna have to go for a run now because this race was like, we just got no exercise. And then he like giggled and goes, my God, and shakes his head. He goes, it was just so boring. And then like smiles. And George is just sipping his water next to him and goes, oh my God, yeah. And they start debriefing the end of the race and George just starts like an impromptu Max Verstappen podcast. And then George was like, you know, we just need to change something for Sunday. And Max was like, mandatory pit stops, 5 stops a race. And George was like, oh, yeah. And Max was like, mandatory naps. And George was like, we should do a lap on foot. It was just very amusing. And I just love that I've never seen them really get along. Like, I know they're the same age and they share so many mutual friends, but I don't know if it's because George is teammates with Lewis and that's why they don't really get along, but it's just been a bit, I just wasn't sure where they stood, basically. Part 3, moving on to Charles Leclerc. The first thing I want to talk about in this section is Carlos Sainz. So Carlos did say he felt like he had the chance to overtake in the first 15 laps ahead of Oscar and in the last 10, but ultimately felt like he couldn't. And really, he kept openly admitting that his entire job this entire time was to help Charles get the win. Every single one of his radios during this race was discussing Charles' strategy. Like, what is Charles doing? How is what he's doing going to impact Charles? What are the people behind him doing that could impact Charles? And that's like literally all he was discussing with the team. And honestly, I think this was a great petition for him as a strategist and as a team principal, because oh my God, the way his brain works at the speed, I know he's not going at his normal speed, but he's still going above 100 miles an hour. And not only is he focused on his own strategy, he's also focused on Charles' strategy. So he's managing several strategies at once. Not to mention that he needs to be contemplating and thinking about all the strategies of everyone around them. So like the way his brain is working during this race is actually insane. And I don't think there's a single person, perhaps bar Fernando, that can even come close to the way Carlos is operating. And I truly, truly think that when this is all over, he's going to be a principal. Also, I want to talk about the fact that he mentioned during the press conference that him and Oscar just magnetically keep finding each other on track, and he just doesn't know why, because they get along so well outside of the paddock. And he's definitely addressing all the rumors. They've both seen the rumors online about them hating each other. And he's like, actually, no, we love each other so much. This has nothing to do with how we feel about each other. We just keep hitting each other on track. Which I kind of believe, like, I definitely think they're fine. Which I think the most obvious element of this is when they were waiting for Charles to join them during the post-race press conference. They both laid down on those couches with their feet facing each other on their phones, giggling, and it was just so cute. Oh, basil. Okay, obviously this isn't like a really traditional margarita pizza, but so we got. So moving on now to the one to like my heart, my soul, everything that I love dearly about this race. Charles. One thing I want to mention before we get into why I think Charles dominated this time is I think a huge thing that played into this. I'm definitely not saying this is the main thing that contributed to his win, but I think a huge part of it was Brian, his new race engineer. And Charles has said that the replacement of Javi, his old engineer, had nothing to do with their communication and was just like internally in the making. Which at all doesn't mean that had nothing to do with their communication. Just because he wasn't privy to the conversation doesn't mean that internally they weren't all discussing that Javi needs to fucking go because he's like a menace to Charles's soul and mental state of being. I think the biggest proof that things have changed for Charles and his engineer is like the fact that they were bantering during today's race, one of the most mentally straining races of Charles's career ever, despite how boring it is. Like, at one point he was like, would you like to know the margin? And Brian was like, I would not like to know the margin. And Charles was like, are you sure I could tell you the margin? And Brian's like, we don't need to know the margin. And please don't tell us. And Charles was like, well, that's rude. And I just thought it was funny because he never had that relationship with Javi, and the fact that he can joke around with Brian. And Charles has said that Brian isn't like fully new. He's been his performance engineer for like ever. So it wasn't like they had to build a new relationship, but it's just a new position that he's in. But they already had a relationship, and you can tell that they get along really well. Brian is my fave. I love Brian. The way they're able to communicate, 10 out of 10. But what else can I say about Charles Leclerc? Honestly, he won the race in qualifying on Saturday, and Sunday was all about maintenance and keeping his position and just fingers crossed, praying, hoping that nothing unlucky happens to him, which has really been the cause of his demise almost every single year. But there were no extenuating circumstances today. He drove at the top of his game and he won. One thing that I will say is he talked a lot about mentality in this race and his mentality. And he said this was one of the most difficult races in terms of managing his emotions and his mental state. And he knew that was the most important thing to focus on. But him saying, like, the only thing I want to correct about that statement, this is also just my guess, is that has always been the most challenging thing for Charles in a race. And the fact that he knew that was a problem is because it has always been an issue. Do you know what I mean? So he knew that's what he needed to focus on. It wasn't that this race was more emotionally difficult than maybe it was something that we don't know about. This race has always been the most emotionally and like most pressured race that he's ever had. And I think Monegasque, which side, that's one of the biggest things that has played into him struggling to succeed here is his emotional and mental state and like just folding under the pressure. And that's no judgment. I don't think any normal person would be able to handle that sort of pressure because it's not just the entire country of Monaco staring down on you. It's not just Monaco, your home race, being the most iconic race on the grid. And it's not that this was your father's dream who's now passed away. It's not that it was your godfather's dream who has now passed away, and that you're bearing both of their wins on your shoulders almost. It's all of that combined that makes this like so insanely difficult for him. And so I don't think anyone's ever blamed him or thought worse of him because of his inability to do this. And so that makes, I think, this win so much more special. I'm tearing up because Charles is just my little Disney prince, and he's had such a difficult life and he's gone through so much. And this win, people who like are trying to negate this win because they said it was a boring race, he won this race in qualifying and he kept his win, and he did it with more pressure than any of us could ever imagine. And he's been through so much, and the fact that he's persevered. Fred Vasseur said in an interview that he thinks that we're about to see a new Charles Leclerc because just a massive pressure has been lifted off his shoulders. And I think he's totally correct. I think the Monaco Grand Prix specifically has been weighing on him. And I think it's impacted his entire performance. And I truly think he's now lighter, freer, more confident. Not that he wasn't confident, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like you sort of did what you set out to do for all of these people that you love and care about. And it's just like a whole thing. Like, I really think mental state, fortitude, control over your emotions was the biggest differentiator this year. Like, he was calm, confident, cool under pressure, and that's what won him the race, which was in turn what defeated the Monegasque curse. Believing in yourself was the key to defeating the curse. It was right in front of us the whole time. Because the answer to defeating the Monegasque curse was himself. Anyway, post-race, when he crossed the finish line, I swear there was nothing like it. Mbappe waved him in. He was cheering. The ship's horns were sounding through the entire harbor. You could literally hear every Monegasque citizen shouting at the top of their lungs. His radios were so raw and emotional. They were literally the opposite. You know, the guttural no that we like are forced to listen to so frequently, where he was just like heartbroken. This was like the exact opposite, like equivalent in rawness, but just like ecstatic and thrilled, and like hearing him cheering and sobbing the whole time was just overwhelming. And in the post-race interview below the podium, he shouted out Jules and he shouted out his father, and he said this was my father's dream for me to race in Monaco and to win in Monaco, and that I finally was able to do it. Damn. It's just so sweet. And also he was like, every step of the way, I saw my friends in their balconies. They saw me at every turn. Like, his whole life is there and they're all watching him. Oh my God, I need to chill out. It's like, it's not the same if like an American was to win in America, because America's huge, right? Monaco is like 4 feet long. He basically knows everyone. Everyone knows him. People see him on a daily basis. Like, it's it just means so much more. Wow, I need to calm down. I thought it was so cute in the cool down room. Carlos was like, did you cry? And Charles was like, I couldn't see anything for the last 2 laps of the races because there was just so much emotion coming up. And Charles was like, and I just kept saying, fuck Charles, not now. I thought it was so cute. And also there's so many videos online of like the marshals crying and like all of them are Monaco citizens and all of them just feel it on the same level as Charles. Alexa, stop. Also in the cool down room, as they were having this conversation, Oscar came down and pulled his chair in. So they were like sort of in a circle, and I thought that was really cute. And I don't know why no one's done it before because it's so much easier to have a conversation that way. And also they were like actually having a conversation, not debriefing the race because there was nothing to debrief. I'll tell you who was possibly more happy than Charles on the podium, and that was Prince Albert, who like shook everyone's hand, was following royal protocol, and then Charles appeared and just like protocol went out the window, and he saw Charles and he just wrapped him in a bear hug and he's wiping away tears. And this means so much to Prince Albert as it means to everyone else. And even Prince Albert knows that he's not the real Prince of Monaco. Charles is the real Prince of Monaco. And Charles got like a full Monaco flag and it kept flying away and it was like a whole situation. And then the champagne came out and Prince Albert had his own bottle this year and he was spraying everyone too. And Fred was there representing the Constructors' Championship and it was just like everything and more. It was so good. And my favorite part is there was a kid, part of the royal like entourage, and Charles hugged him after the champagne spray. And you see the kid wait for Charles to turn back around and then he like sneaks like a little, like he wipes some of the champagne off his suit and then like licks it. I guess he's never had champagne before, but it was really cute. Celebrations. My favorite celebration was Fred and Charles jumped in the harbor to celebrate. Well, Charles shoved Fred into the harbor and then did like a flawless dive after him. It was a little deep, but he did a flawless dive after him. And the wildest part is like in the cool down room, he had put on all this fancy jewelry on top of him. I thought it was APM Monaco, but the commentator said it was his friends and he was choosing to put it on to like market his friend's jewelry. But he had his hat on. He had all of this fancy jewelry on, dived into the harbor. None of it fell off. None of it. Was it like glued onto him? That was crazy. But my favorite part of all this, by the way, when they jumped out of the harbor, him and Fred were sitting side by side on the edge and holding hands. It was so cute. But my favorite part was Red Bull replying to the post on Instagram and said, you guys could have used our pool. And Ferrari replied, now you tell us. Which like I did think about because like diving into the Monaco harbor seems kind of gross. There's a lot of boats in there. Also on the radio, Brian said that everyone from the team is staying in town to celebrate. And Charles was like, you guys better, Jimmy's better be ready. And Jimmy's was ready. In case you don't know, Jimmy's is one of the clubs in Monaco that all of these drivers frequent. And if you ever forget the names of the clubs in Monaco, just look to Max's cats, who are both named after Monaco clubs, Jimmy and Sassy. Also, my favorite part was after all the celebrations, after all the interviews, someone caught Charles biking home and he was talking on speakerphone on his phone. So he's biking with one hand and shouting into the speakerphone in the other. And it was really funny. He had like his jeans tucked into his socks. It was kind of crazy. It also seems like highly ineffective. Like you're not able to talk on the phone well. You're not able to bike well. Like none of it seems like you're performing at the top of your game. He also seemed to attend a gala with the prince, and Alex was by his side looking flawless. She's so straight. She's so straight. Like, is she straight because of wealth? I could never be as straight as Alex, even when I'm like standing properly. How does she look like that? Also, Fred was asked what his plans were after the race, and he's like, the prince invited me to party, and I will go. The French love to party. I say it every week. The French love a party. So he's going to be partying with the prince. I did see everyone at Jimmy's. I saw a video of Charles super drunk with the Monaco flag over his head, drunk at Jimmy's. And I saw Carlos and Rebecca drunk at Jimmy's. I was hoping for more videos, but alas. I did not see them. Anyway, the final result is that Charles was driver of the day, and he's just so easy to root for. There's no other option. Maybe Carlos strategist of the day, but really Charles is driver of the day today. Alexa, stop. Today and every day. I just love him so much. Dick in the box, Esteban, but also Alpine, because like, what is this nonsense threatening your driver in public? Obviously Kevin Magnussen for doing like the most for no reason and not getting penalized for it. And the FIA for not penalizing for it. But really, I think the biggest red flag of today was the red flag. Because it just screwed us all up. Like it made the race so boring. So the final results are, Jesus. Okay, I think this is ready. So the final race results were Charles in first, followed by Oscar, Carlos, Lando, George, Max Verstappen, I don't know why I wrote his full name, Lewis, Yuki, Alex, Pierre, Fernando, Daniel, Valtteri, Lance, Logan, and Guan Yu. And the DNFs were Esteban, Checo, Nico, and Kevin. The standings are as follows. Max with 169, Charles with 138. They're 31 points from each other. Someone told Charles it was 28 when he found it was 31. He looked crestfallen, but then he was like, I don't care about the championship. Charles with 138, followed by Lando with 113, Carlos with 108, Checo with 107, Oscar with 71, George Russell with 54, Lewis Hamilton with 42, Fernando Alonso with 33, Yuki with 19. And then the constructors are Red Bull with 276, Ferrari with 252, McLaren with 184, Mercedes with 96, Aston with 44, Honda with 24, RB Cash Visa, whatever, 24, Haas with 7, Williams with 2, Alpine with 2, and Kick Sauber with 0. But yay, Williams is now ahead. Alex scored them 2 points. And that's it for the Monaco Grand Prix. I want to show you guys the pizza. Hopefully this is good. This is the pizza. I think it turned out rather nice. Now that's it for the Monaco Grand Prix. Next up is the Canadian Grand Prix. TBD whether Esteban will be there, but make sure you subscribe. Share with any potential boxes. Please review and comment if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast. It means so much to me. And you can always DM me or email me with your thoughts, questions, ideas. I just love to hear from you guys. And in the meantime, make sure you follow @BoxBoxF1Pod to keep up in between. See you soon. Box.